Here's the good news. The Chinese are putting 25,000 new cars a day on the road. Here's the bad news. That's 9 million more vehicles a year. And sometimes it seems as though they're all in Chongqing, the megacity in western China, fast on the road to becoming the Detroit of China. It wasn't all that long ago that China traveled on two wheels. Getting to and from work was a quiet, if aerobic affair, marked only by the soft, whirring sound of bicycle tires. Those days are over, and there's no going back. Everything that's good and bad about the automobile is now irrevocably also a part of China. The mobility, the accidents. The independence, the pollution. The noise, the noise. In a Chinese city these days, the most dangerous place to be is on or near a major road or highway, just like America. At least the way America was perhaps 50 years ago, when its great love affair with the automobile was in full bloom. Since so many Chinese drivers have never driven before, there are a great many accidents. Accidents that call for new methods of conflict resolution, which can even include options like leaving the scene of an accident. China's new passion for the open road has led to an epidemic of motor vehicle accidents and a vast new vista of opportunities.
China is a place with a huge potential.
Jackson Tang runs Liberty Mutual in China. Yes, that Liberty Mutual, the American insurance company.
Like a lot of other industries, to invest in China is a long-term investment. If you want to get a good return in 3-5 years, I think you got to the wrong country.
But Jackson Tang is a patient man with a creative, long-term view. This van is sort of a mobile office. Its driver is also an insurance adjuster. Liberty Mutual's client is the driver of the van. It's just a fender bender, but the objective here is to reach a settlement on the spot. This fellow's company insures the Mercedes driver. The traffic policeman arrives on the scene. Who is the driver? Show me your license, he demands. What happened? He asks the other driver. China is still in the early stages of developing an automobile-centered culture, but this thing isn't going to court and there are no lawyers. And while each insurance company adjuster is trying to make his client's case, it is the cop who serves as the ultimate arbiter. He's judge and jury, and he can allocate blame. This guy's 40% at fault, the other guy 60%. In this case, the traffic cop actually rules that one driver is entirely to blame. You're not allowed to cross the line when turning, he tells the Mercedes driver, and that's it. The policeman gives out copies of his official report, and the van driver goes off with the Liberty Mutual adjuster to collect his money. Perhaps because cars are a relatively new phenomenon in China, people handle at least minor accidents with a minimum of fuss. No litigation, no cops, no insurance company. A simple cash payment on the street, complete with change. Something similar involving one of our drivers happened as we were on our way to an interview one morning. Miss Tang here is a former city bus driver. She has a temper about as hot and fiery as the local chili peppers. What happened about 10 minutes ago is that in traffic, she was hit by another car. She stopped in the middle of traffic, tying up everything, got out, started yelling at the other driver. Now, this is what happened. He nudged her bumper. If you can't see any evidence of damage, that's because there really doesn't appear to be any, but Ms. Tang wasn't giving an inch, and a couple of local folks seemed to be taking her side. And the end result was that after 5 minutes of being stuck in traffic, the other driver gave up, gave her 100 yuan, and he went his way and she went her way. Case settled, out of court. Well done. We happened upon this accident on a country road. Nobody died, no one seems to have been hurt, and none of the passengers is talking about neck injuries or consulting his lawyer. China is still a country in which avoiding unnecessary complications is the primary rule of the road. The owner of the van pays 200 yuan, about $27, for his own crane. In Chongqing alone, an average of 400 traffic accidents a day. China's roads are already the deadliest in the world. The U.S. has far more cars and drivers, but China has more than twice as many highway fatalities. And, watch it, 2 minutes later, the van is back on the road. If not exactly roadworthy. As you can see, Liberty Mutual and Jackson Tang have their work cut out for them. Liberty Mutual was allowed to set up shop in China on the condition that it do so in Chongqing, one of the fastest growing cities in the world. It's a mixed blessing. There's no deductible in China where the client might pay, say, the first $100 or $500 in damages. So Chinese customers, most of them new drivers, hit the insurance company up for every scratch, nick, or dent, knowing full well that on these really small claims, Liberty Mutual almost always pays off without any investigation. It's a matter of building public confidence, laying the groundwork for a huge market. What we're looking at out there, that's your future. That's either going to be your fortune or your disaster. What do you think?
I would fully agree this is our future, this is our fortune. Because in China, take Chongqing as an example, the economy is growing. The number of vehicles is increasing rapidly.
How rapidly?
Oh, very rapidly. That could be 30–40% growth in the new vehicle market every year.
Most Chinese have never owned a car. Many are the first in their family to even learn how to drive. While most of us learn to drive in our teens, these are people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. It's different. It's more difficult. They are taken slowly, very slowly, through their paces on the course, driving around and sometimes into obstacles. The freedom to travel where you want to go, when you want to go. That's about as radical a change as China has ever known. And this is a country that's lived through a few revolutions. You can see at a glance that the village of Dragon Spring is a long way from the city of Chongqing, but it's all part of the same gigantic municipality. 30 million people in all. 2/3 of them peasants like Jing Gonglu and her family. And the plan is to absorb about 10 of those 20 million into the city. It's hard to imagine in this humble setting, but someday, perhaps 10 or 20 years from now, the city will have expanded so far that this will be one of Chongqing's satellite towns or suburbs. Tenuous links already exist between Chongqing and Dragon Spring. Now that there's a decent road, take a look at this. Ornamental tree farms in the valley. Apparently, those rich homeowners in the city can't grow their own trees, and they're willing to pay for these. How about that? And these oranges? There's an American exporter buying up all they can grow. Change is everywhere. It pulls up in front of Jingonglu's house every morning. A modern bus that picks her and her neighbors up and takes them and their harvest into town, to the market, on a well-paved road. And those roads are springing up everywhere. This woman is part of a two-person team. You can't see her husband. He spends much of his life down at the bottom of deep holes, filling buckets with dirt, while she winches the buckets to the surface. Both of them, either of them, would be hard-pressed to explain their part in building a national highway system. But that is what they are doing, digging footings for a highway. There must be machines that could do this job, but conserving manpower is not China's problem. Putting hundreds of millions of dirt-poor people to work is. Any job that can be done by manual labor is. This lifestyle, hard as it may be, is actually an improvement for them, and a small but vital part of building China's future. Building a massive new highway system is one of the government's highest priorities. The countryside has fallen so far behind China's cities. Indeed, there are so many thousands of peasant protests and demonstrations every year that improving the rural economy is considered a national security issue. The Chinese government has almost certainly studied President Eisenhower's decision more than 50 years ago to develop an interstate highway system. That too grew out of national security concerns. Eisenhower wanted to ensure the speedy evacuation of America's cities in the event of a nuclear attack. But those highways and the explosion of cars that flooded onto them changed the face of America. They prompted the movement of jobs and people into the underpopulated South and West. They led to the creation of sprawling suburbs around every major city in the country. Mobility led to the development of shopping centers, industrial parks, drive-through restaurant chains. But most of all, the availability of cars, roads, and cheap gasoline led to the greatest redistribution of city and country people America has ever known. Which is exactly what China hopes to achieve. The Chinese government is betting its economy and its future on the success of the automobile industry. These men are laying wire for dynamite, preparing to blast their way into the base of yet another mountain, carving yet another tunnel through the range of mountains that has kept the further reaches of Chongqing isolated from its urban center. Tunnel digging employs thousands of workers, people like the Chuns who have come from Sichuan province 5 hours away. They work 11-hour shifts in the tunnel. Yu Han is 51 years old. He is a professional tunnel worker who just finished a job in Beijing. He brought his entire family with him. His son, Ji, who is 25, drills footings for the tunnel. Father and son work 7 days a week if they can. They earned $8 a day working construction in Sichuan. Here, they can make $14 a day. Besides, says Mr. Chun, construction stops when it rains. Working in a tunnel, you can make money every day. Ji's young wife is trying to get a job on an electronics assembly line. The sun at the center of their little galaxy, the joy of all their lives, is the 2-year-old grandson, Guo Jiang. Would you like him to be doing the same work someday?
It's entirely up to fate. If he studies hard, maybe not. But otherwise, he'll have to do what I do.
Mr. Chun's wife has her own responsibility, caring for young Guo Jiang. She and Mr. Chun have been married 25 years, and she follows him wherever the work is. 5 people will live in one room of this ramshackle dormitory for 10 months. We asked how 5 people could possibly live that way, and Mr. Chun said, "What do you expect? This is a construction site." He and his family endure the noise, the dirt, the lack of privacy, he said, because they see it as a way to ultimately improve their lives. They're building roads as fast as people can buy new cars.
It won't be long before China overtakes the U.S. and becomes #1 in the world in highways.
#1 in highways, #1 in cars. And this man will be right at the heart of it all. You can beat a metaphor to death, but this one isn't bad. What you're looking at here is China in microcosm. On one level, a perfectly groomed traffic cop going through elegantly rehearsed motions. Go here, stop there, these are the rules. While a generation of newly minted drivers revels in a communal explosion of anarchy. All of it monitored, though hardly controlled, from Zhongjing Traffic Center, where feeds from more than 700 cameras follow the action all over town. That's China, an authoritarian government just barely in control of what's happening. Meet In Mingshan. All you need to know about In Mingshan for the moment is that he plans to be to Zhongjing what Henry Ford was to Detroit.
Foreigners grew up with cars, so there's nothing special about owning a car. To have a car is a normal thing. But in China, only top government officials, foreigners, and rich people could buy or even ride in a car. So when regular Chinese people earn enough money, they have a very strong desire to buy a car. That's why I believe China, in the very near future, will become the world's biggest consumer of cars.
China has gone from having virtually no private cars a few decades ago to more than 30 million by the end of last year. Indeed, if current trends continue, China will have more cars than the United States by 2030. More cars, more roads and highways, thousands of miles of roads and highways already under construction. China's first modern highway opened 20 years ago. Now they have 33,000 miles of new expressways. You can't change a country's infrastructure like that without changing the entire country.
It's almost like the Wild West out here. Some people follow the traffic rules and others don't.
A lot of these people own their car in the first time, and they just got the license. They were very eager to drive. But I would say the driving habit is not as good in Chongqing. For example, taxi drivers, it's crazy.
Taxi driver Tang Ring-Xiu might bristle at the analysis, but she'd be the first to acknowledge that Chongqing does have major traffic problems.
We can't drive fast in downtown because there are too many people. It's a big headache. People don't obey the traffic lights, and they just cross the road anywhere.
It's hard to know whether Ms. Tang considers herself and her warrior-like driving style to be among Chongqing's traffic problems, but she is clearly unrelated to any solution. This is a Ford showroom in Chongqing, where the customer is treated like a visiting dignitary. Understand that 80% of those Chinese considering the purchase of a car are first-time buyers.
The Chinese customer is not just about himself.
Vivian Palmer is a Ford marketing manager.
It is very much influenced by his family, because this is a very significant purchase, especially if it's a first-time buyer. It's not about just him or her being in the vehicle. So the whole family needs to be convinced that this is the right vehicle.
This is the Hu family, 2 brothers, their wives, and 1 sister. They're going to split the cost and share the car. 9 out of 10 buyers in China pay cash. Chinese cars are much cheaper, but nearly 3 out of every 4 cars sold in China carries the brand of one of the giant global auto companies like Toyota, Volkswagen, and Ford.
We know the Ford line, but we want to check it out for ourselves. This car is very good. However, the price is higher than the Chinese cars. But they're all made in China. The American cars, too.
The cars are nearly all made in China, and they are better than the Chinese brands. The prospects of all those Chinese customers has every foreign automobile company drooling. But there's some major league local competition girding itself to compete here at home in China and eventually in the United States.
We have to make use of every second, every minute, every hour. Our company wastes a lot. Workers are just standing there waiting for the line. Why are they getting paid to do nothing? I'm not sure you guys understand me. Every time I tell you, you just simply don't get it.
In Mingshan owns Li Fan Motors and has been building cars for 3 years. Before that, he was known as the motorcycle king of Chongqing.
When you were younger, when you were starting your motorcycle business, you took some technology from Honda. You reverse engineered it, and then you started making your own motorcycles. The reason that the United States is worried about selling high-tech products here is they fear that Chinese scientists will reverse engineer it and steal it.
Technology develops very fast. If America doesn't sell technology to us, the Germans or the Japanese will. Secondly, our engineers are working quickly to develop our own technology. So, in the end, you will lose your opportunity completely.
That's in Mingshan. Okay, so I stole some technology from the Japanese, and if you won't sell me yours, I'll buy it somewhere else. He's not shy.
Compared to the rich Americans, the Chinese are still very poor. What right do the Americans have to stop the Chinese from getting rich? According to the American Constitution, all men are created equal.
When he's not misappropriating the U.S. Declaration of Independence, In Mingshan composes his own slogans for the Li Fan Motor Company. One of my own favorites loosely translates as, "If you screw with Li Fan will screw with you." He already sells cars throughout the developing world, and now AIG, the largest insurance company in America, has agreed to make a major investment in his company. Study him closely. He's tough, he's competitive, he doesn't mind bending the rules, and he has his eye on the U.S. market.
I want to send a message to China and the world that you can't dump dangerous products on American consumers.
Philadelphia lawyer Jeffrey Colino's view is understandably colored by the fact that he represents the families of 3 young construction workers who were involved in a fatal car crash. The cause of the crash was tire failure, and that, says Colino, was the fault of the Chinese manufacturer, who cut costs by eliminating a critical safety feature, a 30-cent gum strip.
If you do not watch the Chinese manufacturer every second of the way, they will find a way to put profit in front of safety,
A lot of Americans have a jaundiced view of China and its impact on the United States. Bob Sabina is head of the United Auto Workers Local at a Monroe, Michigan plant that supplied Ford with drive shafts and catalytic converters.
Because we've been already told we can't meet that lowest bidder, then we won't do business with you. Right now, the Chinese are the lowest bidder pretty much, so wages are cheaper. I mean, health and safety like ours is non-existent in China.
There was a time when America's economic trousers were supported by what is now loosely referred to as the Rust Belt. The automobile industry and its associated suppliers sprawled across the Midwest, providing middle-class jobs to blue-collar workers. Now, that's withering fast as production moves elsewhere in search of cheaper labor. Ford is shutting down the Monroe operation later this year, affecting 1,200 jobs. Except that some of those jobs are moving to a new plant just a half hour away. Same jobs, same equipment, same union. Different employer and much lower pay.
I was making $28.63, I believe, at Ford's, and I'm making $15.75 here.
And the new boss is, you guessed it, Chinese.
We bought more than 10 different manufacturing companies in the United States in the last 10 years.
Pin Ni runs the American operation for Wanxiang, China's largest auto parts company.
This is a perfect, classic business model. It fit us in terms of what we're thinking very well, which means American assembling, American engineering, American customer service, and the China component, which means the low-cost components.
With a buyout and a pension from Ford, Mark Rafko says he came out ahead.
It pretty much is a no-brainer for me. I don't look at who owns the company, who's financially backing the company. I look at it as a job, a good job.
Far from resisting Chinese investment in the United States, local government officials from Michigan are now making regular trips to China to attract even more such investment. One morning in Chongqing, we ran into this delegation from Wayne County, which includes Detroit. They were trying to drum up business from Chinese auto parts companies like Wanxiang. Aboard their bus, going from one meeting to another, Wayne County Executive Robert Ficano acknowledged that Michigan made a huge mistake a generation ago, and he doesn't plan to repeat it.
What we want to do is not make the same mistake they made with Toyota and they made with Japan. They weren't really welcomed with open arms. Where's Toyota have all their plants now? They're not in Michigan. And yet, they're big investors in the United States.
The Chinese automobile industry is poised to become the biggest in the world. That's not a hope or a dream. That's a conscious, strategic decision made by the Chinese government. That plan has already made China the world's largest producer and consumer of steel. That plan is one of the main engines of China's sizzling economic growth. That plan will put tens of millions of new Chinese drivers behind the wheel of tens of millions of new cars, speeding along thousands of miles of new roads and highways. Well, good for China. But what's good for China, it turns out, may also be good for General Motors. Liberty Mutual's CEO Jackson Tang will tell you the automotive status symbol in China these days is an American car, a Buick, a black Buick.
The Buick are popular cars in Chongqing, and they like black cars because that represents elegance and status.
Buick has a long history in China. China's last emperor, we're going back more than 80 years now, he owned at least one Buick. Even communist leader Zhou Enlai owned this 1941 Buick. The fact is that General Motors got an early foothold in the new China, and its partners in the Chinese government insisted on bringing back the Buick brand. Now, more Buicks are sold in China than in the United States. GM dominates the market with more than 1 million vehicles sold last year.
Buick is an old brand, and nowadays we have lots of new brands coming out. But Buick still has a better reputation.
And what's good for General Motors, it turns out, is also good for Ford.
A lot of work is manual because we're trying to take advantage of the low labor rate here.
Mei Wei-chun is the executive chairman of Ford in China. He says that China's cheap labor costs are even cheaper here in Chongqing.
The gap between the coastal area and the western part of China is fairly significant. And that's part of the reason why we're investing in Chongqing, because we expect that the western province will also grow at a very fast rate, and then we'll be in the place where the market will be.
Which is exactly how the Chinese government planned things. And the Ford Motor Company is an essential ingredient of that plan. The government designated Chongqing as one of its centers of auto production. It's on the Yangtze River, which flows to Shanghai and the Pacific Ocean. And it's a good deal for Ford, whose sales are plummeting back in the United States, while here in China, sales were up 30% last year.
It's not going to be a secret to you that there are a lot of people back in the States, in Detroit, in Dearborn, who are watching this interview right now, and the steam is coming out of their ears, right? Because they see Ford in the United States going down the toilet, they see Ford in China doing brilliantly, and they see their jobs coming over here.
Well, I think obviously we have some challenges today with our business in the U.S. market. And I think our leadership is doing everything to make sure we correct that, so that, because that's a very important part of our business, the U.S. market, because still the #1 market in the world.
Although if Chinese projections hold, that won't be the case for very much longer. So if you were going to try to bridge the cultural divide between Chinese car manufacturers and the U.S. market, which iconic figure would you put on your dashboard? Selling Geely cars made in China at the Detroit Auto Show may require actually bringing Elvis back from the dead. But the Chinese car makers are serious. And some of them expect to be in the U.S. market by
2009. We hope to come to this market.
And here's what they think might appeal to the U.S. consumer. These hybrid cars produced by a cell phone battery company, which just got into the auto business, and these whimsical little electric vehicles. Millions of new cars have made China's cities among the most polluted in the world. Chinese still favor larger cars as status symbols, and in Beijing, for example, it's been reported that 40% of cars have no pollution controls at all. But car makers are betting that eventually there will be a big market for cleaner, fuel-efficient models. This Buick Riviera concept car is one of the first cars designed primarily in China. It can carry a new hybrid engine. Zhao Min headed the Chinese design team.
Chinese, the name is Buick 未来. 未来 in China means future. So I think this is just the perfect Chinese name for this concept car.
In the meantime, though, GM is also marketing the king of all gas guzzlers, the Hummer. It's so big, she says. Every time I see a Hummer, I get so excited. It's awesome. It gives me a feeling of power. Selling more than a few symbolic Hummers in China actually makes little or no sense. The Chinese government is subsidizing gasoline prices to keep them artificially low, less than the price that Americans pay. But that's a short-term fix to a long-range problem. The Chinese demand for oil is growing 8 times faster than in the West. And eventually, growing demand has to drive prices up, leading to inflation and a potentially dangerous situation in which worldwide demand for oil exceeds supply. The government is pushing hard on alternate solutions. Chongqing is actually converting all of its taxis and public buses to run on compressed natural gas. And from this station attendant's point of view, the experiment is working.
Drivers prefer natural gas. It's cheaper, and there's much less pollution in the air.
But talk to taxi driver Tang Ren-Xiu, who has to work 10 hours to earn $14, and you hear a different story.
Refilling natural gas is difficult. We have to line up for hours. This adds to our problems, so we can't earn a lot.
Which is why she drives like a maniac.
We drive fast. If we drive slow, we can't support our family.
But no matter how fast she drives or what fuel she uses, China will have a hard time keeping up. This year, for example, China will put at least another 9 million vehicles on the road, 25,000 new cars a day. A growing number of them foreign cars, with superior technology assembled in China. And here's where the Chinese government plays another important role. GM, Ford, every foreign automaker who builds cars in China is required to have a Chinese partner who owns at least 50% of the operation. They watch, they learn, and eventually they compete. Kevin Whale is head of General Motors in China.
They're already a competitor. They sell cars under their own brand, and we've known that all along. That's a process we knew would happen in the Chinese industry.
I now present to you the new Liebao CS7.
Which brings us back to those Chinese offerings at the Detroit Auto Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the killing.
Chinese automakers are a long way from becoming competitive in the United States. Indeed, there's not a Chinese car to date that has passed U.S. emissions and safety tests. This video, though, of a Chinese car spectacularly failing a Russian safety test can result in misleading conclusions. For one thing, the Chinese are very quick learners. But there's a far more compelling argument to be made for the quality of Chinese cars ultimately headed our way. Here's Bill Pollock, who plans to import the first Chinese cars to the United States early next year at a price 20% below any comparable vehicle.
The government knows that if any single manufacturer brings a vehicle into North America that has issues, it's going to kill it for everybody. They will not allow that to happen.
And the Chinese government has a vision, a strategic plan for the automobile industry. Theirs and ours. They have seen what the automobile culture did to and for the United States, and they believe it will do something comparable for China. Here again, Mei Wei-chen of Ford, China.
Are we going to see a day when Fords being built in China are being driven in the United States?
Our main focus and the long-term strategy is focusing on this wonderfully and high-growth market, China. That's our first priority.
I heard that.
And then,
I got that.
if we can satisfy the demand of the Chinese consumer, then obviously we will consider export those vehicles to those markets that has the demand for the vehicle that we built here in China.
You must know what your long-range plans are. And those long-range plans, at some point or another, include selling cars that are produced here in China overseas.
As I said, when we have the capacity and the cost advantage, we will consider opportunity to expand our marketplace in markets that may want to have these products.
The world we're looking at right now really is, I mean, as far as the business community is concerned, it's got nothing to do with national loyalty anymore. It's just an international business. Wherever you can do business. I mean, do you even consider that you're working for an American company?
I'm working for a global company because Ford Motor Company has a presence in many, many countries across the globe. So we are there looking at the market opportunity, the demand of the consumer.
You know, in the old days, the line used to be the old General Motors line. You know, what's good for General Motors is good for the USA. That world is gone.
The only thing I can say is that in many ways, Ford Motor Company is a global company and we need to be competitive on a global basis, and we are.
The name of the game is capitalism. Who would have thought that China, of all countries, would be so good at it? The Chinese economy is racing into the 21st century on the back of the automobile industry. Mobility is bringing growth and expansion and corruption. You know what this is all about? The chorus? The smoke machine? The cute kids? It's all about fighting corruption. And if the Broadway production values don't do the job, the Chinese have an even more compelling piece of anti-corruption propaganda. Here's a look at what happens to the folks who get caught, with a background of sobbing violins in case you missed part of the message. And this is the audience they're targeting, the inspectors who regulate the businessmen, the ones most vulnerable to payoffs and kickbacks. What did we find out? It isn't working. And we'll tell you why in our next program.